Players have a lot of resources at their disposal in Dungeons and Dragons games. They have tools, weapons, magic items, magic, player skills, and other player abilities. But there's one asset that seems to be largely neglected by the party more so than the others, and that's cold hard cash, coins, stacks, dough, bread, cheddar. Now I'm just making myself hungry. It's ironic that the asset that has the most pure economic value is the one that is most undervalued by your players, but it's true, money can often become quickly irrelevant in our D&D games. The players may struggle for a while to begin with, but once they secure their first significant treasure hoard, those worries tend to dissipate away. Now, if you're a wizard or a magic user, copying and researching magic spells is quite expensive, and if you make it deep enough into your campaign, getting into domain play can also be quite expensive if you're trying to build your own stronghold. But the truth is, most games just don't make it that far. So money is collected and then often forgotten. I think we can use money in our games to make more interesting scenarios and kind of drive action forward, both for players and game masters. Hi, welcome back aboard the Earthmote. I'm Randall, and today we're talking about how to use your hard-earned coin for your maximum advantage in your D&D games. When I was working on this video, a story from Joe Abercrombie's First Law trilogy came to mind. There's a minor spoiler warning here for a single story thread in a 15-year-old book series. Skip ahead to the time on the screen now if you don't want to hear it. At one point in the series, a central character is tasked with a mission to hold and defend a Union city from their hated enemies, a southern empire. When the character arrives in the city, he finds that its defenses are in a sad state of affair. There's this moat that is kind of blown in with sand, so it's not really a moat at all. The walls are crumbling, the gatehouses are showing some serious vulnerabilities. The character realizes that he can fix these problems, except it's going to take a lot of time, labor, and money. So he writes to the Union's Council of Advisors, asking for funds so he can begin fortifying the city. The council writes back to him and tells him he's flatly denied. He's going to have to make do with what he has, but he must defend the city. Undeterred, our protagonist begins upgrades to the fortifications on credit. He tells the workers and the craftsmen that they will be paid soon. Without knowing how he would do so, he quickly racks up over $500,000 in debt. In what looks to be the final hour of his scheme before it all kind of comes crashing down and the workers riot against him in the streets, he receives an offer for a substantial sum of 1 million marks in silver, gold, and precious gems from a major bank in the story. But by doing so, he'd become personally indebted to the bank and as a result would be compromised in his professional capacity. They were not asking for repayment of the coins, but rather would ask him for favors and abuse of his authority, all for their own gain. Realizing that he has no other choice, he takes the deal. The city would be lost without it, and his life would probably be forfeit as well. And as a result, he has this massive debt weighing on him for the rest of his days. Now, this story is a great example of what money can do. In this single story, we see that it can pay for major projects that are beneficial to the players. It can be used to fund armies. It can be used to gain leverage or favors from individuals. But you know something that doesn't cost any money? That's hitting the like button, and consider subscribing if you're enjoying this video and you want to see more content like this in the future. Another example comes to us from David Graeber's Debt, the First 5,000 Years. He recants the tale of Hernan Cortez, the infamous and vile Spanish conquistador responsible for the death of hundreds of thousands of Aztec people and the destruction of their empire. In 1518, he manages to be named commander of an expedition to establish a Spanish presence on the mainland. From first-hand accounts, we learn that Cortez begins dressing and living the part of a bold and gallant captain. However, he has no money to defray these expenses he was incurring. He was poor and very much in debt at the time. As Graeber goes on to describe, Cortez was living beyond his means and got himself in trouble, and decided like a reckless gambler to double down and go for broke. Cortez set sail for modern-day Mexico with 600 men, whom he promised equal share in gold plunder. Now fast forward through 3 years of war, campaign, and massacre, Cortez emerges victorious over the Aztec Empire, and their royal treasury is secured. Now here's where Cortez and his officers connive to sequester most of the promised gold for themselves. And when the final tally was told, the men in Cortez's expedition wound up earning 50 to 80 pesos each, a paltry sum for 3 years of war for one of the gold richest kingdoms in the world. On top of that, Cortez charged his men for the replacement of equipment and medical care they received during the campaign. Most of the men actually wound up in debt despite their grand prize being captured. Ouch. As for Cortez, he pulled off one of the greatest acts of theft and plunder in world history. With so much wealth gained, he could pay off his old debts. Yet Cortez always seemed to find himself in new ones. Only a few years later, Cortez was reduced to pawning his wife's jewelry in order to finance an expedition to modern-day California to reclaim his lost fortunes. He failed, and his life ended deeply in debt and poor. Now, what can we learn from that story? People of high status can rack up significant debts despite appearing wealthy. It's costly to fund military expeditions and forays. And despite hitting a massive fortune, people can lose it all and become indebted once again. Money drives the real world. We see it through the funding of advertisements, political campaigns, and financial markets, and so on. And it can certainly drive your fantasy worlds as well. There are plenty of kingdoms with infrastructure projects, debts, taxes, wars to be paid for, and so on. So often I think we focus on what our gold can buy us physically, like things on the equipment list and the armament list. And that makes a lot of sense. As adventurers, we need those tools to go off and do the main part of the game, which is adventuring. But by the time we hit 3rd or 4th level, we are pretty comfortable in our gold amount. We can pretty much comfortably buy anything on the equipment list, and the money tends to just accumulate. But to let all that gold sit idle, it just feels like a waste. It feels like we could do something better with it. As a game master, you should be creating opportunities for your players to buy information, buy favors, buy allies, and so on. As a player, you should be looking for opportunities and areas of investment to spend your hard-earned coin into. Let them know that Baron Dusty Wallet is deeply in debt. That's an asset that could be bought. Or have the community leaders come to the players asking for money to fund a public infrastructure project. Let them know that the town would revere them and come to their aid in a time of need should that ever arise. Let them bankroll the Duke's army that is off to seize nearby lands. Lands that the players have had trouble gaining access to in the past, and something valuable they want is on those lands. Or perhaps the party can call on the use of the Duke's army in some future time should the need ever arise. If you want to break it down, I see that there are 6 main categories that might be productive areas to use your coin. Obviously, it's going to vary depending on your game. All campaigns are unique, but we have sort of 6 overarching categories that I came up with, which are political, civil, military, economic, religious, and arcane. And you can deploy your coin in different forms. Ultimately, you are spending the coin, but the method on how you choose to spend it adds a lot of detail to the context of the situation. The 5 that I came up with here are direct expenses, financing, which is like loans to different characters and they'll pay you back with interest. Gifts, players can make charitable donations to maybe earn the favor or the praise of other figures, like funding public temples or things like that. And then bribery, which is spending money to get a figure of authority to abuse their power illicitly for the direct gain of the party member. Looking at these 2 groups, you get a wide array of different options on how to spend your coin. Directly expensing the costs to fund the Duke's military is a lot different than offering to finance his military. On one, he owes you money back, and on the other, he owes you future favors. A political bribe implies they are offering you favors of their authority for illicit purposes, whereas a political donation means you are supporting a politician's campaign in hopes that once they are in power, they will bestow more explicit favors upon you, like granting a charter to establish a keep on the borderlands. All right, so we've talked about what to spend your money on, but how do we go about incorporating these ideas into our games? Well, as a game master, you're going to want to look for ways to create characters or factions with problems that can be solved by money. Make nobles with bad debts, make priests with grand ambitions of creating a great temple, make wizards with harebrained arcane experiments with costly ingredients and materials. Then you need to layer on elements of your campaign on top of that character. Make the character a key member of an important faction in your campaign, or have the character involved in a key conflict within your game. Or perhaps they have knowledge or access to something that will aid the players in solving a secret or mystery within your setting. That way, the NPC or faction needs something, money, and can offer something of value in return. Assets, information, access to people, etc. As a player, you'll want to look for signs that the character has ambitions or problems that can be solved by coin. That may require asking around, hiring spies or informants, or carousing with high society to learn more about them. Then once you have a target, you can make your offer and see what happens. Now, one of the criticisms of this method is that it could feel less exciting or interesting to use money to solve our problems in RPG games. If you can bribe the gatehouse guard to let you in with your illicit goods, is that even a real challenge? There was no skill roll or creative magic use after all. Well, while I think that's a fair question, I don't think it actually holds much merit. I'd argue that money is one of your most finite resources that you can have on your character sheet. Your spells replenish after resting. They don't really cost you anything beyond the use of that spell slot for a single day, which is a cost, but is it a steep one? Not necessarily. What about a skill roll? Well, you can try to persuade or deceive as many people as you'd like. You're really only limited by the number of social encounters that you run into. But gold, you just have X number of gold on your character sheet, and once you spend it, it's gone. Yes, you can get more through adventuring, but how much and when are definitely uncertainties. So I say if your players have a good proposal and are willing to spend the money, let them have it. Advance the fiction forward based on that transaction. But also, hopefully it's obvious, but you should have problems that can't be solved by money. That way you have a mixture of both. It would be boring if everything were one-dimensional. But I'd argue that money often is an overlooked dimension in our RPG campaigns. Adding it in as an option is actually adding more depth to your game, not shallowing it. By the way, just because the players are spending the money doesn't mean that they are free and in the clear. There can still be risk attached with their investments. Say they choose to finance the Duke's army. Well, okay, that's great. But what happens if the Duke loses his war? Well, their investment is gone and that military asset is rendered useless to them. Or they don't get access to those lands the Duke was trying to seize in the first place. If they're making a risky contribution, I'd be upfront about that. Just let them know that there is a risk involved with it. And that way they can make the choice if they want to make that investment. But things can and definitely should be risky. You can play a mini game to determine if the Duke was successful or not, and just let the dice fall where they may. I like using dice or other methods of chance to resolve these sort of things. That way I'm just as surprised as the players are to see what happens. And I think it's a more fair method of judgment rather than DM fiat declaring it succeeds or fails. Maybe you add extra dice or give it a flat bonus modifier based on how much money they're willing to invest into a plan. But that's up to you to decide and determine based on the situation, the risk, and the investment that they're making. So that's it. Let me know in the comments, do your players use their gold creatively like this, or do they tend to hoard it like a dragon and it's just largely rendered useless in your campaign? I think it's a valuable asset. I think it can make things very interesting and dynamic in our games, but it's one that I've seen underutilized by players in the past. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. It really does help the channel out a lot. Thanks for hopping aboard the Earthmote. I'll see you again soon.